Hey, good morning. Good morning, Rich. How are you?
Good, Chris. How are you this morning?
Good, good. And looks like we are live on our different
Oh,
platforms, which should be
awesome.
Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, even my LinkedIn channel.
Nice.
So I always forget to go get the link to the LinkedIn channel for the Dev Talk Show because if they ever get 150 followers to that channel, then we can stream directly there instead of going through my LinkedIn channel. So,
Nice. Yeah. I, al- I forget we have you we do the intro music, and there's actually there's three flavors,
yeah,
and
yep,
there's I have the 2 minute version when I run it. So in
yep,
my mind, that's where I'm kind of back
yeah,
clocking that, and you only have the 1 minute version. Like,
yeah.
oh wait, we're going live now.
No, you're right. I yeah, and that was an interesting story behind that music too, right? Because we have like a real quick hit and then the 2 minute one, and then I tend to hit the 1 minute one because I always feel like, oh gosh, we're starting late. Like I always feel that way, even though I don't think it matters like what time we actually start. I always kind of feel like, oh my gosh, we're starting late. So I hit the
Right,
one
right,
minute
yeah.
one.
Yeah, I don't yeah, I don't that was two was always what I need because it was kind of like, well, you see we get people who are already, which is awesome, already looking and watching live, which is great,
Yep.
just based on counts. But yeah, it kind of lets people know things are coming. So,
Oh
and then
yeah.
we have the
I
really short 30-second one for when we end. So
yeah. No, you're right. So welcome to the Dev Talk Show. It is uh what is it today? It is July 8th,
eighth, yeah,
2024. So
yeah,
we are past the halfway mark for the year. And I know how busy the end of June is at Microsoft.
oh
Um,
yeah,
as many people may or may not know, Rich is a Microsoft employee, and I am not a Microsoft employee. A lot of people confuse me with that, though, because I do have a recognition for Microsoft, which I'm really grateful for as a Microsoft MVP, which
yeah,
just means they're saying to the community, hey, this person helps out a lot. So it's always appreciated, and I appreciate that. But I know how busy the end of year is because it's busy on the MVP side and busy for you too. So
yeah. And we're a little bit of a lull, right? So it's New Year, so new things are starting, and with the holiday, that's kind of coming at a good time. So we had a little bit of a break, and then this week starts up again with talking to customers and doing all the cool stuff that we can do with our toys. So
yeah, and after some gorgeous days here in the Philadelphia area, which we're both based out of, it's gotten very hot.
yeah,
So at
summer's
least,
here.
yeah, hot for me, anyways. I don't know that it's no hundreds, which I know much of the country is dealing with, but
Yeah.
for me, I go, you get to 90 with any humidity, or even 85 with any humidity, and I'm a little
I'm
out of
with
my
you.
element. Yeah.
I mean, you get to
That's,
80 regardless of humidity, and I'm kind of all right. You know, can
yeah.
slow down.
So here we are, and for those of you joining us, we're going to start a new phase of the Blazor authentication journey.
Cool.
Um, if you haven't joined us here on the Dev Talk Show, you'll see in our past shows on the morning hour playlist, we have done many shows on Blazor authentication. And what started this journey was that in Blazor and .NET 8, um, when we started exploring Blazor and .NET 8, we really spent a lot of time on the render modes. And that came out of, I mean, this goes all the way back to that first announcement video from Steve Sanderson that I like to play now and then about Blazor United, which really was the render modes of Blazor and especially interactive auto. And so we've covered interactive auto, interactive WebAssembly, interactive server, which is a SignalR based interactivity. We've covered server side rendering. And then while we were doing that, I think what happened to both of us is we said, look at these templates. You either pick your render mode and you have a bare bones app, which is great to start building on, or you pick your render modes and everything, but you also say you want authentication, and then you get this avalanche of code.
Right.
And we said to each other, what does it all do?
Yes, because now it's part of your project, right? So you
Yeah,
should
now
know what
it's
it does.
yours. Yeah. Yeah, now it's yours. And so, as what does it do? And what if you want to change it? And what if it's customizable. There's nothing wrong with that code. I think what we've learned in this process is that if you start with that template, you can go in and like remove things and disable things. Maybe you don't want email verification, or the reality is in order to get it, you've got to implement it anyways.
Mhm.
You don't want multi-factor, or maybe kind of like a place where I land a lot is I don't want to have any storage of my own website. I don't want users to come and create logins and passwords. I would much rather they use something they're already comfortable with, like a Microsoft login, whether that's a personal account, a Google account. And since we tend to also, I think, focus on using these things at work, which sometimes
Right.
gets left aside, I think a very common pattern at work is we already have an Entra ID, formerly called an Active Directory for some folks who may not be aware. We already have,
Azure Active Directory. Yeah.
yeah, you're right, an Azure Active Directory. We already have one of those. Why can't we just authenticate the users through there? And so
Mhm.
we've focused on that as well.
Yeah, and
Um,
we got that working on the last show, right? We were able to
yeah,
make that connection and show that you could bring those in. And I dropped a link in the chat just in case those people who may not be aware. All of these, everything that Chris has talked about that we've done over pretty much the last year and a little plus, is up on our YouTube channel. So you can go check this out. You can go look at those and um, leave your comments there if you do, because we'd love to know what your thoughts are as you go back and relook at those.
yeah, and I actually do want to thank everyone who has been leaving comments. We try. I tell you, they all get read. I'm not going to promise they're read the same hour that they're written, but we both do read the comments and we chat with each other about, hey, here's what people are asking. It adds to the list of things that we can do. And I think, as many of you hopefully have noticed, try to respond to them. If there's a specific question that we have an answer to, just try to just answer it right there. Or they also are inspirations for future shows. We are up to, according to the current, and I know it's a little finicky, according to the current channel analytics, I'm astounded by this. There are 965 subscribers to the channel. That I know that sounds, in terms of like some YouTube creators, we're not trying to say Mr. Beast or anything, but I never thought that we would be approaching 4 digits, uh,
Right.
adding approximately 40 subs a month, which tells me that we're very close, right?
Mm-hmm.
To rolling over that 1,000. So I think that's pretty crazy. Yeah, I don't know how to. It's funny because we did the whole moderation thing, and I'm still struggling with figuring that out.
Yeah, I can
So,
focus on that if you want.
okay, yeah, all right. So, what are we doing now? Thanks for, like I said, thanks for joining us, and I want to set some expectations for this video, whether you're watching us right now live or you're watching in the future. If you've been following along and even checking out the code, which it's another thing that I should be adding here, is where the repo is for this code. We should even go over it a little bit here. So the GitHub repo for Blazor Auth shows is getting added now to, it's going to go to GitHub. I'm sorry, it's going to go to Twitch and to YouTube. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. And here we go. So this GitHub repository is called Blazor Auth from scratch. And it is meant to be a stopping place for folks who want to see how to do this, starting with templates that don't have any authentication set up. If you go to the source repository, we have 2 projects in here right now. Certainly the organization can use some work, but we have a server project. And what is the server project? This project started with no interactivity. There can be some confusion in Blazor render modes because there's server-side rendering, which is no interactivity, and then there is interactive server, which is the SignalR-based interactivity. And we also have the WebAssembly version, Blazor Auth from scratch WASM. And in this version, we started with a global WebAssembly render mode project and added authentication to it. And that's where some of the first real wrinkles started for us, where you have to sort of, I use this term, we have to sort of marshal the user identity from server side to client side so that the WebAssembly can pick that up and say, okay, the server side is telling me that Chris Gomez is logged in and that they're an admin, so I can show this UI. But you still have to log in through a server. And so you saw us, if you watch those shows or if you go back and watch them, you'll see that we actually create the login page in server-side rendering. So we're going to begin adding to this because what I'm showing now is the introduction to identity on ASP.NET Core. And this is the documentation. There's a ton of ASP.NET Core documentation. If you click on Web Apps and Blazor, you will get the Blazor documentation that frankly has guided Rich and I for everything that we've done. There are also other folks to thank too. The .NET channel has had videos with people from the team, people who aren't from the team, some longtime contributors to Blazor, people like Carl Franklin, Rocky Laka, Steve Smith, and now that I started naming, I'm going to feel terrible because I won't name everybody in the community who has done so, and of course, a ton from Jeff Fritz, who does work for Microsoft, to stand on their shoulders and deliver you kind of this content has been great. So what you may not realize is that in this documentation, if you go to the ASP.NET Core documentation and you got to scroll down a little bit, you get to security and identity, and under the authentication header, you get to ASP.NET Core identity.
Right.
And certainly a lot of what we've done has come from here. But I think if you just look at these headers, it's very easy to overlook how to do certain things. I know I certainly have come through this documentation from a side entrance by searching for something, and then I end up here and I go, oh, I didn't realize it was just sitting in the docs. And that is something called custom storage providers for ASP.NET Core identity. So I think the question is, why am I bringing this up? And it's because if folks have been following along, in fact, I should go ahead and get Visual Studio going so that we can look at some code. In case anyone's wondering, all of this, you do not have to have Visual Studio to do any of this. Everything works fine, whether you're using your favorite editor. We also know that there's a path with VS Code, and other editors work fine too. So if I go to the server project, actually, this is not, this is what I want to do. If I go to the server project, this is server-side rendered Blazor, where we actually sign people in. I haven't gotten it in a while, so it's restoring NuGet packages, but it should be ready to go. So if I go to our login page, we have been, in the server side, we have been supplying HTTP context as a cascading parameter. And then we've been using some extension methods that are built into HTTP context thanks to a NuGet package, right? This is not, oh, that's interesting that it's complaining there. Is that because it's expecting a line? Yeah, that's interesting. Because we have the NuGet package for authentication in this project, we have been using this method and other methods like it to sign people in and sign out. Sign in async, sign out, stuff like that.
Okay.
If you take a dive into, so let's say you've been following along, but you're a little curious like us, and you have been looking at the templates, and you've been saying, okay, they've been doing this on the show. How does this work? I want to dig a little deeper. And so you dive in. You might say to yourself, well, something you're doing very differently on the Dev Talk Show is you are not using the SignInManager.
Okay.
Yeah. And so that's true. This is now a project that we use as a reference. This project is creating a Blazor Web App with interactive WebAssembly and authentication, but doing nothing. So that way we kind of have it as a reference of how do you do things, or how did they do things. And if we go to the login page for their app, which is here, login.razor. Let's see, this should be, they signed someone out using HTTP context. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. So if you go to the login page at any point and you're using get, which I think this is pretty sharp actually, is they're saying if you surf to the login page, to use 90s terminology for the web, if you surf to the login page, which would be your browser doing a get,
right,
then let's sign you out just in case. That way you don't have an existing cookie.
Okay.
But when they sign someone in with their password, look at this method they're using. They're using password sign-in async, which takes an email, a password. In fact, I think we can take a look. We can take a look at its definition here too. It takes, zoom in this way. It takes username, password, and then you have to tell it whether or not this cookie should be persistent, meaning you could like close the window, open it back up, and should you lock them out if they fail. And that's very interesting. Like, where did this method come from? It comes from an instance of some kind of class called a SignInManager, and it's a generic. And the implementation for this uses the application user class, and it's calling a method on the SignInManager, right? Where's the SignInManager? That's right, the thing.
That's new.
Yeah. It's new to us. It's new to us.
New to what we've been doing. Yes.
Yeah. If you've been following along, and so I would not blame any of you if you've been watching the shows and that's gotten you curious and you said, well, heck, Rich and Chris are in there looking through the source code. Why don't I do that too?
Right.
And you come across this and say, well, they're doing something different. Why? Well, the reason why is because in order to use the SignInManager, you have to provide I believe at a bare minimum, you have to supply an IUserStore implementation.
Okay.
Well, where is that? Let's open, again, we're back in our reference project, and we've talked a lot on our channel about when you're doing client-side Blazor or interactive auto, you're going to have two projects. You're going to have what we refer to as the server-side project here, and then the client-side project next to it.
Yep.
So I'm in the server-side's program CS. That's where all of this is being set up. You might be getting to be very comfortable with these statements, adding authorization and authentication. That's fantastic if you are. But what's interesting is you come down here, and this section here from 28 to 31, this is setting up entity framework and getting a DB context for you to use throughout your application in order to call entity framework and hit a database for user information.
Okay.
And so that's user information like, users, what's their role information. And then also, it also does have, their account information. There's a username in there. There's a hashed password. The password is not in there, but a hashed version is.
Mm-hmm.
And this sets that up. Okay, well, we've been ignoring this. We have not been creating any kind of data store. So there's two reasons why you might want to change this in the real world. Number one, you may not want to use SQL Server. Well, fortunately, that's actually not a difficult change. In fact, I think it's as easy as saying use. I thought there would be a use SQLite one in here, but you know what it might be? I bet you there's a NuGet package you have to have in here first.
That would make sense.
Yeah, I think so. In fact, the way I'm going to prove that is I'm going to go to manage NuGet packages. And I think we're going to see it. We're going to see the SQL Server package. Here we go, right here. ASP.NET Core, Identity, Entity Framework Core. This is setting up the identity provider that Microsoft, the ASP.NET team or someone is providing for us that just automatically knows how to talk to a SQL Server. And you also need this too. The reason that's important is that we also have the .NET CLI. And in the .NET CLI, I think I can say .NET new list and we get all the projects. Yes, that's correct. So with the .NET CLI, the project type for, I made an adventure out of that. The project type for, it's just called Blazor now, right? So Blazor is the project type. This is the new fangled project type, .NET 8 and beyond. A project template for creating a Blazor web app that supports both server-side rendering and client interactivity. That's 8 and above.
Okay.
Now, in this template, we can say that what's interesting about it is when you read the wording of this parameter, so you say .NET new Blazor, and then you can specify all kinds of stuff. If you want to be from scratch, like we have been this whole time, you say auth none. But if you leave this out, I'm sorry, not if you leave it out, but if you say auth individual, you can also just say -au and then individual. Now you will get all of that support code that you get in the template, right?
Yep.
So you can do everything that you can do in Visual Studio. You just do it through command line parameters. If you want SQL Server, you say use local DB, which I know is a little bit odd.
Okay.
You're like, but what you're really saying to it here is go ahead and set up SQL Server support, but set my connection string to be a SQL Server that's using local DB. And if you don't know what local DB is the implementation of SQL Server for developers that ships with Visual Studio. That was a mouthful. If you got a little bit of gray hair like me, local DB is just the thing that you've used for a long time. That's really what it is. But we know we have a lot of viewers that are new to .NET, or maybe just, some of this stuff builds up over decades and you just you can't learn it all in a day. So if you use that switch, right?
Okay.
It's going to set you up the same way Visual Studio sets you up, with a local DB instance ready to go. Well, the instance is actually not ready to go. Entity Framework will set it up the first time you run migrations, but it's going to be a SQL Server on your box for development.
Now, quick question. Is that in-memory SQL Server, or does that persist across debug sessions, essentially?
Yeah. So local DB is a version of SQL Server that runs on your machine. It doesn't require it to be installed. It doesn't have to be installed the way SQL Server installed, which is a service with all kinds of privileges on Windows Server to allow it to be connected to from the outside. Mm-hmm. It's like a specialized version of SQL Server that this is the answer to your question, that is really creating SQL Server database files on your machine.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's an MDB that you can go find. In fact, it's an interesting thing. Maybe we'll have to devote a show to local DB, because I think a lot of developers, even developers with a little bit of gray, don't know that there's command line tooling to interact with local DB. You can see all the instances on your machine. You can remove them. You can start them. You can stop them. And the reason why that would be important is that if your development machine gets a little long in the tooth, you might start to one day say, like, wow, why am I colliding? Why is this app colliding with that app and this app and that app? Well, because you probably have hundreds of local DB databases. Right. And you want to go clean it up, but you don't know how. You say, how do I clean it up? And sure, you could get SQL Server Management Studio, or you could even get Azure Data Studio, and you could connect and you could manage it that way. But you can also do it through the command line. And why do I like that? Because let's say, a little bit of an aside, which I apologize for, but let's say I'm creating a GitHub repo that I want you to be able to take this and at the very minimum, I want the code to run, but maybe I need you to do a little bit of custom machine setup. So here's a batch file. Here's a PowerShell script. Here's a bash script, and it does the right thing.
Cool.
So command line tools are great. That's why I love command line tools, is that automation comes from command line. I love GUIs. I love sharp. I call those sharp tools. I love having everything. But then when, you can't automate a GUI as easily as you can a command line. So
definitely not.
That was a long-winded way to point something out, though.
It's one of those hidden things. I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Probably about 80% of what you said, I had no idea was there. So
yeah,
it was good to go through that.
It'll be interesting to go look at that. We'll have to figure out how to look. I don't. It's the kind of thing I have to go search for every time, so I don't have it committed to memory where the command line tool is. But we could find it.
Cool.
But notice that it was a switch to get SQL Server support.
Yes.
That's weird. Like I had to opt into it, but I don't have to opt into it in Visual Studio, because in Visual Studio, that's what you get when you do a template there. Mm-hmm. When you create a template from the command line, if you don't specify, then it actually uses SQLite by default.
Okay.
So a little bit of a shift there. Command line, you get SQLite by default. Visual Studio, you get SQL Server by default. You can switch. For simplicity, if you decide you want SQLite to be your support, I'll just give you the advice. Create the project here and then go open it Visual Studio. Or I'm sure with a little bit of elbow grease, we could create both and we could look at what the small difference is, and then we would know what to do.
Yeah. I mean, it should be in that setup, right? In that program.cs, right? You bring in, you're instantiating that versus SQLite.
I think it would be a different, in fact, I mean, we can check it out.
It's a little bit of a different connection, right? Because I'm sorry, I don't want to derail us here either, but it's a file-based database, SQLite is, versus, as you said, you having that lightweight version of SQL Server, you still get the MDB files,
right,
on your disk.
Yep, that's right. So I'm going to go ahead and say .NET New Blazor individual. I'm just going to do that. I think that should be fine. I did it wrong. That was supposed to just be a single slash.
Yep.
A single dash. That's right. And then, so now that we've done that, I can even just do a code dot, just so we get Visual Studio Code. And I guess this, if you're on Linux, and we haven't done it in a while, but people know that I like to use Linux on this show too.
Mm-hmm.
Here's program CS. What is the difference? We're going to find out right now. It's use SQLite. But remember, that extension method wasn't showing for us in Visual Studio. And the reason why is going to be, first of all, that, I can tell you what the reason is going to be. It's going to be NuGet. So let's go to the project file.
Right.
And here's the difference. 2 changes. Instead of bringing in the SQL Server based entity framework core package, bring SQLite in.
Mm-hmm.
And then bring in, change the extension method that you use. That's it.
Nice.
You're using SQLite. Now, when I say that's it, I actually do believe in app settings, you're going to need different default connection. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, true.
A MySQL, I'm sorry, not MySQL, because that's different. A SQLite connection string, not a SQL Server one. So, like if I go to app settings here, we're going to see, I think I got to go to app settings development. Notice they put it in development so that it's only, maybe I don't have to. Oh, that's because I'm in the Blazor auth from scratch. Sorry. I picked the wrong project. That's a SQL Server connection string for local DB.
A little longer.
Yeah, it's a little bit longer. They create a database for you that they throw a GUID name on, so that way if you bring the project down again and again and again, you're not colliding. But this leads to the lots of databases. So, you win some, you lose some, I guess. So there's a little bit of a lesson that was a little bit of an aside, but it goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, which is that in our version of this, where we're building from scratch, you can see here, we are not bringing in Entity Framework.
Right.
And what may be a little frustrating for you is that it feels like an all or nothing sort of proposition. If you bring in Entity Framework, the way they bring it in, and I think that's very important. This set of code actually has nothing to do with identity. This has to do with creating a DB context based on an application DB context. And notice the difference here. We own that code.
Right.
So we can go find that code, and I'll do it on I'll purposely say, let's go to implementation so that it jumps to it. And then I like coming to Solution Explorer and clicking this button right here so that it jumps to it in Solution Explorer. And here it is. It's in the data folder. So they've created an application DB context based on the application user. So this is ours. We own it now, thanks to the template. But this comes from the platform.
Yep.
They've implemented an identity DB context for us that they already know how to use to do things like look up users, look up their roles, look up the password hashes. They know how to use it for that purpose.
And much like I've seen with some of the other, there have been some videos where they go like kind of in depth into the .NET Core and some of the things they do inside of there that are optimizations based on the way they expect users to use those kind of those parts of the framework. So right. I'm sure there's by having this come from the framework itself, I'm sure there's a bunch of optimizations in there that help when do those things that you were just talking about doing.
Right. Now, when you create an identity DB context, we're actually creating our own, but we are deriving from the platform one. You have to, it's a generic based class. You have to tell it the user.
Sure.
Well, we own this user as well. By own, I mean that it came with the template.
Okay.
You don't necessarily have to create your own user. I do think it's a good practice. I will flat out tell everybody I think it's a good practice.
Okay.
What's required is that the user that you hand the identity DB context must at least be of type identity user.
Makes sense.
That's from the platform.
Yep.
This is ours. It's in our code. When I click here, it's right here in the data folder that came in the template. We have not, this is not our own from scratch implementation yet. We are still looking at the template that will inspire us for our from scratch implementation. But identity user, if we go to its implementation and we're going to let the source server dive in, I was hoping it would dive in for me. Go to definition. Yes. Mm-hmm. This is coming from the platform. That's why we get the little lawyer MIT license stuff. And we can examine this to see what's in here. And there's a lot of interesting stuff, like the username is built in. In fact, we actually really have to go deeper to get to kind of what comes with it. So it's an identity user of string, and we know that it's got a username. There's an ID, which would be the primary key for a database. Username, normalized username, which I think is interesting. They store in email is standard. Whether or not the email has been confirmed is a standard Boolean. The password hash, the security stamp, which is an interesting concept that I've just been learning about recently.
Okay.
It becomes really important for the Blazor Signal R implementation, it turns out.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, I knew about the security stamp, but I was like, what is it? It has more uses than that, but that's where it seems to really drill in on authentication in the templates. Phone number, is the phone number confirmed? So they give you a lot in identity user. They're ready to support two-factor auth. They're ready to support lockouts with a time-based ending, or how many times has the user failed. And all of this is going to end up in your database created by Entity Framework. All of this is going to end up in there.
Nice. Okay.
Okay.
So question.
Yeah.
And I'm hitting you, from left field with this one here, so you may not know. There are some decorations on those properties. One personal data, another protected personal data.
Let's go take a look. So I made the mistake of leaving that definition. Let's get back in there. Identity DB context. And this is, remember now, the identity DB context comes from the platform. You're not going to find this in your Solution Explorer. You're not going to find this in your generated code.
Right.
But I have enabled, we may need to do a video or something on this. I've enabled Visual Studio with the source server for .NET so that I can jump into that code just as if it was mine, just by saying go to definition and boom. It doesn't, for many of you, if you try this, you might say like, well, that seems to work for me, but you might be getting the decompiled version, which is okay. I did that for a long time, but sometimes the decompilation lowers the code to the point that it's almost unrecognizable. In some cases, it actually does a pretty good job, but in some cases, and so I said, you know what? I want to set up the source server to just take me to the code. So, you were asking about
those properties that you were running through.
So this is an identity DB context, which is from identity user. So let's go to that definition. And I wanted identity user of string, which is this one. So I want to hover over these because I think what we're going to find is these are attributes that are set. I used the wrong zoom in. That they're coming from the identity platform. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Protected data, protected personal data. I haven't dug into why they're marked this way, except that I think it may be some platform implementation related to GDPR, the required European-based regulations for personal data. But I haven't dug into what does the platform do with these, which I think the answer to that is I think identity might help us with both making it easy to find the attributes to delete when somebody requests deletion, because that's required by law in EU jurisdictions, right? And when I tell you that I think this is what it does, this is my guess because I have not dug into the implementation underneath those. But I believe just by thinking it through is that this must be so that when I go to the profile and say delete myself, that it must help the platform say, well, look, in order to comply, I've got to make sure I delete this stuff. And that's probably not the only purpose. There could be some other purposes as well, such as perhaps to make it easier to not show on screen the protected personal data to someone not authorized to see it. But I'm not going to tell you that I know how that works yet.
Okay.
The key was you may have been, something we'll have to figure out. You may have been looking at expecting it to be entity framework based notations, but they're not. Now,
data, right?
We could well, that the fact that they're from the identity platform, not from entity framework. If I go to the definition, now we're seeing that it's a personal, this is what they're saying, used to indicate that something is considered personal data and should be protected. But what I have not done, because this takes a little bit of work, is if I say find all references, well, that's not going to help me here. What I really have to do is go to the ASP.NET source code and start looking through it and saying, what do they do with this?
Okay.
What are the classes that look for this attribute? And now what are those things? And what are they? So there's a little bit of research to do there. But when I was looking through this class, I just hovered. I didn't do any more than we did just now. I hovered and I said, oh, that's interesting. I thought I was expecting them to be, in some respects, I was half expecting it to be data annotations. You, like in Entity Framework, you annotate the data so that you can tell it like, oh, this is a foreign key or it's not a foreign key. But it's not. It's coming from the identity platform. So it must have some use there that I'm not trying to tell you all that I know what it is, but that's something to learn in the future, I think.
Something to be aware of. Definitely. Okay. Cool. Thanks for that.
So we're back in Program CS on the server side of a interactive WebAssembly project. And what we're seeing is this is not technically identity code. It's really just saying we now have a DB context available to us. And it's already set up with the connection string set up. We've even set up the database exception page so that way when you're running in development, if the database blows up, we will show you that exception so that you don't get frustrated and say, I don't know what happened. But when you're not in development release mode, then we should be suppressing that and just saying, oops, we don't know what's wrong.
Got it.
This code. So once we needed the DB context to be ready, because this code is what sets up identity in Blazor in the templates. This is what sets up the heart of setting up Blazor authentication to be managed by the entity framework based DB context. That's what this code on line 33 through 36 does. It kind of reads pretty easily. We're adding identity core. And we are telling it that our identity core is based off our application user.
Yeah.
And then we're saying, oh, by the way, in our app, we require that accounts are confirmed, which is just this. You could set that to false. There's actually many other options as well. I could very quickly, I think, here, let me do this. I'll put it back.
Okay.
But let's get rid of that. And we could see there's all kinds of, I want to say there's all kinds of other options. We had the sign-in option, like here's a password option. And you say equals password options. And I thought we were going to see more than that. I wanted to say that you could see options. You could set like how long do you want the password to be. Maybe I have to say I think I have to say a new password option. Yeah, you were right. Oh, okay. I require a digit. I can say false. I mean, look at this. I require how many unique characters must the password contain? Well, maybe it's got to have 4. I don't know.
Yeah. So
your whole password scenario can be set here. But this is what we get in the template.
Okay.
I guess what I'm saying is don't sleep on this options.
Yeah.
Just because the template only uses it for one purpose, there's a lot in here.
Okay. And I'm sure much like some of the things we saw elsewhere in the identity bit, require confirmed account, you define what those rules are, right? What does it mean to... You would have something in your application that would say this is what it means to be confirmed.
Yeah. You get default implementation in the templates.
Okay.
And the default implementation is email confirmation.
Okay, which is where I thought that would go.
Yeah, that's the default implementation. Now, that's a funny thing because that very same default implementation in the templates no-ops it. And as you've seen us many times on the show, if you watch the show, is you go to log in and it says, okay, well, you're not confirmed yet. So normally you'd have to go check your email. But since that hasn't been set up, just click here and it confirms it. Okay. So it turns out, I don't know if you remember, but back in the identity user class that's in the platform, there's a login confirmed Boolean.
Yes.
So it ends up being a column in the database, just confirmed or not.
Right.
You could theoretically have your own method for confirmation. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's not email based. Maybe it's a 2-factor thing. I don't know. And then you would replace that implementation and flip that bit from false to true based on your criteria.
Yes. Yeah. And this also gives you that flexibility of, let's say for whatever reason, some exploit comes out and it's email's not the way to do this anymore. We need to do it this way. And now you can just bring that into your application.
Yep. So that's line 1. Line 1 is we are telling identity, go ahead and go to work. And here is the type of user that you're going to be managing. Now, that type of user, I know we just went over this a little bit ago, but that type of user is the application by default in the template is the application user. You can change this name to anything you want, but it has to be derived from identity user. You might ask yourself, like, what is this for? In your application, it might be useful to you to store more data alongside the user in the database, right alongside all this user information like email and password hash and stuff like that. Now, you have to make this decision yourself. And I think that there would be many arguments that break out over whether it should be in here or should you not pollute this and maybe join somewhere else. And really, that's architectural design of yours. It's not really, I think, for us to say.
Right.
But let's just pretend that we were building an application that managed like youth sports teams. And so every user was belonged to one of the teams. So you might think that it makes sense for you to have a team name parameter. And now in the database, you'll see all the normal stuff for identity, username, email, whatever. Maybe we should do this sometime. And then you'll see one more column for team name.
Oh, well. Okay.
Right? That's your call. You can leave this blank if you'd like. The reason I like this practice of just going ahead and using application user, something you own, it's really not that different from coming back here, because I could do this. I could come back here to this right here and program CS, and I could change this to identity user and just use it right out of the platform. But I feel like most of us think that, since it didn't cost us very much and it's not like the code is unreadable and hard to understand, that you might as well go ahead and just take ownership of this, so that way, if you have to change later, it's not that big a deal.
Yep. You're setting yourself up for extensibility if you need to.
Right. And it's not like the code you own here is outrageous. It's right now it's a blank class. So I'm fine with that. Same thing with application DB context. You own the application DB context. It's in our Solution Explorer right here. But all it is right now is just the identity DB context with application user defined, and that's it.
Yep.
So again, nice to have this just in case you need it a little bit later. But for now, that is basically saying these two lines of code are saying, let's use identity, let's use entity framework.
Yep.
Here was the whole point of the show. This was the whole point of the show today. Was add a SignInManager. And once you add SignInManager, you now have an injectable component that you can use in your components, like we use right here we don't use it. In the template, they inject the SignInManager of type application user, and now they can go in their Blazor code and they can sign someone in using this extension method. So what does this extension method do for us? Well, as we've talked about in previous shows, if you're going to sign someone in, you see what we've done. We just take their username and sign them in. You're on the hook for determining whether they filled out the login form correctly.
Okay.
And what do I mean by correctly? Well, no one should ever implement their login form this way, but your login credentials might be username, and then the password might just simply be the username reversed. Now, no one would ever do that, and you should never do that. But my point is to say that in our previous examples, we have been leaving you on the hook for deciding how do I know this user is valid? You must come up with that methodology. As we progress through the SignInManager, which obviously, a lot of our explanation today, we won't get into much code, but as you progress through implementing the required classes for SignInManager, what you are doing is either taking the base implementation, which we might do in some cases, or providing your own that says, here is how you decide that this user is valid. And password sign-in async calls that for you. So base implementation, what you get in the box is you're going to get something that takes an email, takes a password, looks it up in the database. It can't look up the password. That's not possible. But what it can do is take the password and it can hash it and salt it and stretch it the exact same way that it has for its answer. And after it does it, it compares the two and says, well, I hashed and salted and stretched it the same way this was whenever they registered, and it's the same, so they must have given me the correct password.
Yep.
And then the other thing it also does for you is it takes a Boolean. If the remember me Boolean here.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. That is a field called is persistent. If you don't check this, or if you set this to false, that's the better thing to do. In most login forms, there's going to be a checkbox.
Right.
If you set it to false, then the cookie that's sent to your browser is not persistent, meaning that you leave the tab, close the browser, cookie's gone.
Okay.
Got to log back in. If you set this to true, then the cookie is persistent, this is all browser stuff. The browser says like, well, the expire time on this, I don't know what the default is, but you can set it. You can set the default. I think the expire time might be 30 days. I'm not 100% sure what it is by default. And so I can close the browser, I can come back, and the cookie is going to come back, and it's going to be like, yep, I'm still logged in.
Yep.
So we are doing all of this. I don't want to make this sound like it's a lot of work for something not important. What we're about to do is we're enabling the sign-in manager so that we can use convenience methods. But these convenience methods, I don't want to make them sound like they're just convenient, like, having a Wawa attached to a gas station is convenient. Like, this is helpful to you. These are hard things to implement. Getting password implementation right is crucial. So yeah. I actually think it's better to start down the path, but doing it from scratch is daunting because we have everything we talked about already. Is how do you even set up the front end to do it? And how do you sign people in? And so we are now getting to the point of, okay, let's take care of our house for the user accounts. Yeah. And the other question you might have is, if I'm only doing external providers, do I even need this? Right now, my answer is no.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do I need to take this step if I'm building a website that only takes external auth? And I'm not convinced on that answer yet. I think we need to spend some time with the sign-in manager and really think about this, because I don't want to give bad advice here. Like, that's really important to me. But part of why I say that, I was hoping that we would go to the definition of the sign-in manager. Oh, here we go. So this is in the platform here.
Yeah.
Is the sign-in manager, what we're going to have to think about this. The sign-in manager does more than just sign you in. I think it also manages claims. So I may take that statement back. I think it's going to be looking through the templates. But when we think about what we got with our own from scratch implementation, is we basically sent a third-party challenge out to that external provider, whether it was the two that we've implemented so far, Google and Microsoft, right?
Right.
They took care of the rest, including, if you watched our last show, I was a little surprised that the Microsoft provider was telling me, like, you've got to set up two-factor auth. And it did it. My app didn't do it. It did it.
Okay.
And what came back from that challenge were the claims that Microsoft was giving me about that user, which was nothing more really than the name, and I think an email.
Okay.
And another thing that we've done in our previous videos is, when we were using the Google external provider, we also were getting back the claim for the account picture.
Right.
And we were taking that account picture claim and saying, well, let's take this out and display it on the web page.
Right.
Just to show you can. I know we can do this on the Microsoft side too. Mm-hmm. Just haven't done it in a while. Right. So that kind of makes me think, like, if the third-party provider gives me the claims I need, I'm done, right? Like, I have everything I need to continue, but I'm not sure. So I don't want to necessarily say that we're going to completely ignore sign-in manager. There may be other benefits that I am ignoring right now.
So let me throw one of those out there, and then I have to jump out for like 10 seconds to open up something. You mentioned the two-factor auth.
Right.
What if and that's totally relying on your IDP.
Right.
What if your app, because of the data you have, you want to make sure that anybody who authenticates with you includes some two-factor authentication mechanism? And yes, you'll still push it off to the IDP to do, but you want to make sure that that verification was done.
Right. That's a pretty good question. And so we know that in the Entra ID world, it looks like that's set by the administrators, because I don't even know how to turn that off. But if I was taking a Google account, now here's what I got to be fair about the Google account implementation we did. We did a public Google accounts,
Yep.
which I think are very, I don't say this in a negative way. They're very bare bones compared to if you know,
Well, we compare them with the right thing, right? There's the Entra
right.
ID, which is
Entra
your
ID, organizational. Yes.
and then there's the quote unquote Microsoft account, which is Outlook
Right.
Live,
Yes.
Hotmail, those kind of, and
Yep.
that compares to what you're talking about on the Google
Yep.
side.
Right.
Okay.
It's a personal Google account. And now I'm not an expert in this field, but I do know for sure that Google has organizational accounts because many schools use them. So I already know that concept exists.
Yep.
And we know it exists in many platforms. So I don't know if the short answer is that the organization would handle that, but boy, would that be interesting to try and set up and learn and figure out, because that's like the real metal meets the, boy, I was going to really mix metaphors there. The rubber meets the road type of stuff that developers have to do that isn't obvious.
Yeah. And I think going back to your earlier point around, well, why is this all in here? And I think that, we've been talking to, or when I talk to customers, the conversation comes up around the DevSecOps, right? And part of it is, the DevOpsy side of things and how things get deployed. But a lot of it is, as a developer, I need to start thinking about this.
Mm-hmm.
Or, we've been telling them and having this built right into the framework so that if you need to hook those things up or go down this, more secure, happy path of identity, it's kind of there making it easier for you to fall into that pit of success, as we say, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I was not trying to wipe out what was on the screen there. So I think we have a journey that we're going to go through that we barely started, which is, it sounds like it's the first domino to fall, really, is that I have been avoiding, kind of like the plague, the SignInManager. And it's not because I don't like it. It's just because, wow, there's a certain amount of stuff you have to build just to get sign in working at all. And so if you've been very patient with us watching the shows, you've seen that, like, we start with the what's it called, the authorized view route component, and that gets us a cascading auth provider. And then we learned about auth providers, and so we had to learn all this stuff just to get sign in working. But if we would have said, let's get the sign in manager working from step one, that just makes it a larger mountain to climb.
Yes, we're building on what we did in those first three shows, part 1, 2, and 3, and now we're making it that much more secure by doing this.
Right. So I do want to get to doing this correctly. Well, I don't want to say necessarily correctly, because I don't want to say the other way is wrong, but to using the sign-in manager. But it does require, we can't use the sign-in manager until we implement a UserStore. Like, we were stuck. We couldn't do it. So absolutely had to implement a UserStore. And so the question now is, like, how do you implement a UserStore? And we only have 10 minutes left, so I think we can get started on that. But there's no way that we're going to get through the complete implementation. At least I don't believe so. So since we absolutely have to have a UserStore to do any of this, what I'm hoping we can do is get a UserStore implemented. But I think the code will compile. But what I don't know yet is, I don't know how much of it's going to run or blow up or anything like that. So let's go ahead and try this. So one of the first questions that I had first of all, I don't need interactive WASM anymore. We are now back. We're going to be in the Blazor Auth from Scratch project. This project, if you haven't seen it before, allows me, I can log in with Google, I can log in with Microsoft, and then I have my own login, which we will be replacing. But my own, let's see how quickly it can go. My own login today only requires me to put in a name. It doesn't even care what it is. And it just, okay, you're logged in. That's it. Not great. Doesn't go to a database. Doesn't do anything. So we are going to, in order to get to the place where I can change this code to say add sign-in manager, first we need a UserStore. So the first problem that I kind of had was, like, where do I put it? Like, I really struggled with that.
Okay.
So let's let's go ahead and say, remember, we're doing this from scratch. I'm not going to put it in components. I am more than happy for us to rethink this, argue about it. We'd love to hear what you think in the comments. I wasn't even all that thrilled about creating this folder called providers.
Okay.
I mean, I'm creating a custom identity provider, but what I don't like about this folder name is that, imagine, brand new, first day, developer comes in here, and what is providers?
Right.
So, I mean, should be identity providers. I don't know. I don't know. It's so generic. It's like manager.
Yeah.
I don't know how I feel about it. But since naming is hard and I didn't want to get hung up on it, I went ahead and said, let's get started. And then we'll figure it out. Now, I like to do some naming that really makes things stick out like a sore thumb for purposes of learning. So I don't know that we would always call it My User Store, but like this makes it stick out. Like this is ours.
Sure. Yep.
And what we have to do, if people, because I keep talking about having to implement your own user store, so we're going to have to implement an IUserStore. And you might say, well, where does IUserStore come from? It's complaining. It's not happy about it. What if I right click and say, do I get any help from quick actions? And I do, because it says, well, are you using IUserStore from identity? And I am. Yeah. So that's good. It's helpful. Yep. Obviously, we could type this ourselves.
Sure. But it's still unhappy.
It is still unhappy. And there's a couple reasons why it is. One of them is that IUserStore, as we can see in the, I couldn't remember what this is called, but thank you for IntelliSense telling me that IUserStore requires a type argument. It's a generic. That's what I think most of us developers just call it. We say, oh, it's a generic. You got to supply the type that it's of. Yeah. It's called a type argument. And I guess I sort of should have known that, but whatever. So it needs a type argument. Well, we have been telling everybody, create an application user class.
Right.
You don't have to call it application user, but you own the class. It's your implementation of identity user. Right. But that's not turning teal. And the reason why is, remember, we're in Blazor Auth from scratch. We don't have one of these.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, you don't get one in Blazor Auth from scratch because you're not implementing identity in the scratch. If you don't say that you want individual accounts for your authentication, and we can find that very quickly in the reference version. Bring the reference version back real quick. Here it is, Solution Explorer, under Data, Application User. Yep. We got that here, but we didn't get it over there. Now, fortunately, this isn't very hard. We are really going to just steal this because there really isn't a whole lot of code here.
Sure.
And for now, I'm going to go ahead and put this in a data folder. Only because that's what they did over in the template. Didn't like that very much. That's odd.
Data exists.
Do I really already have a folder called data in here? Maybe I do. Maybe I do. And that could just be a mistake on my part because there shouldn't be one. Let's see. I'm looking at the, oh yeah, there already is a data folder and it's empty.
Let's just bring it in.
Since it's empty, I just actually deleted it. So that way this should work. You're right. It could have been the other way. So I'll just say data. It's fine. That was great. And we need a class.
Yep.
So we're going to add a class and we're going to say
application user, right?
User. Yep. Okay. And there's really not a whole lot here, although I actually am going to need that namespace. So let me save that because otherwise I'll forget what it is. And we're just going to drop that here. And then I'm going to use Control-K-D to make that, just to get that. I just wanted to see how it structured it. And that's it. That's set. It's not totally everything, though, because we need a using statement to go get it. Yeah. And I'm just going to let it pull it for me. All right. Now, still not happy.
Yeah.
We haven't implemented the interface.
Okay.
So to implement the interface, we're going to go ahead and use another refactoring to implement the interface.
Okay.
And I like doing this because now I should be able to run the application, set breakpoints, and watch when these things are called.
Yes.
Oh, they're going to blow up, but at least I can see what calls them.
Yeah. And there's, that's the full implementation, right? You may not be needing all of them.
That's exactly it. Is I don't believe we need all of this. So in this implementation, I can create users, I can delete users, I can find them, I can get out the normalized username, and then further down, there's going to be other things that we implement that basically allows the sign-in manager to go find the user. Like the sign-in manager is going to want to find the user,
right?
And so we don't know how all that's going to work yet. So we're already hitting 9. And I know you had to run. The last piece of this was seeing how, does it work, quite frankly.
Yeah.
And when I say does it work, look, we're not talking about a complete implementation, but we're back in our program CS. And so at this point, we can do this, although it may not be the way we want to go long term, is I can say, we're going to need to add some usings for this, and the sign-in manager also using ASP.NET Core Identity. And this code is going to build.
Yeah.
Okay, so it builds. Notice what I did not add. I did not add the entity framework support.
Yep.
Which is okay, because we're not at that point yet.
Okay.
I've been kicking around that maybe we'll use a different database provider. We'll figure that out.
Sure.
This code builds. It runs, but it doesn't do anything. And the reason why is because we've now got to go get our front end wired up, because our front end is not trying to even use the sign-in manager.
Oh, right. It's still trying to use the cookies?
Well, what we did manually, which was our front end manually call sign-in async straight off of HTTP context.
Gotcha.
So we're gonna be modifying this code, or maybe what we'll really do is create a different component, so that way we don't have to throw this away.
Yep.
We're going to be modifying this code. We're going to be trying to get the sign-in manager working. We're going to see those exceptions blow up because it's not really implemented. We'll have to come up with a way to store this stuff. Maybe we'll do it in memory to start. Maybe later we'll do something else.
Yeah.
But it is 9 o'clock, which means it is time for stand up. And I really want to thank everybody for bearing with us today. We had a lot of explanation. Hopefully, we'll get this into the GitHub repo, and then hopefully next time we start zooming towards using the sign-in manager, and then we'll learn the benefits as we go.
Yeah, this is awesome. This digging in a little deeper here around identity and securely accessing your application. So this is pretty incredible.
Yeah, and there's so much to it, and I can't believe how long I've used ASP.NET, and now I feel like how did I feel safe using it without a deeper understanding of the identity stuff? Like, it's almost a little scary.
Okay. Yeah. Hopefully this helps, because sometimes you just got to get it working. Which, we all go through it, but this, I think, gives you a better understanding of, well, this is why I did that. So.
Yep. So we've got March more to go. We'll definitely see you folks later this week. At least for me, not tomorrow, but we'll be back later this week. So Rich, I know you got to run. I want to help get you out of here. And so for Rich, I'm Chris, and thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Dev Talk Show.